Social Studies 20-2, source number one. The theme of the week is foreign policy, interwar foreign policy between World War I and World War II. So there you go. Source one is a map showing the peak of the German uh, expansionist policy of the 1930s, the peak of the Third Reich, what was known as the Third Reich in Germany. Hence the swastika. So this would be Germany here, France, Switzerland, of course, was neutral, Italy, Yugoslavia, Ukraine, Belarus, and other countries as we go east. Poland would be right here as well. So things that you would want to point out would be, the fact that this is almost all of Western Europe, which is very significant. Um, and it's not just the size of territory that they're controlling, it's the fact that it's Western Europe in the 1930s, which was very well off, very industrious. A lot of money, resources, and wealth would have gone with this Nazi German occupation. You would want to point out they could never defeat Great Britain. You might talk about that. Um, I would talk about this as the result of the German expansionist policy of Lebensraum. I'm not sure if you remember learning about Lebensraum last week, but Lebensraum was German living space, more territory for Germany. So things I would point out would be the unification with Austria, Anschluss, the annexation of Sudetenland, and then the taking of all of Czechoslovakia, and then the ultimate invasion of Poland, which would have resulted in World War II and the beginning of that conflict. So I would just show the size of the territory. I'd refer to specific countries that Germany had conquered. I would talk about Lebensraum. I would talk about examples of Lebensraum. You might mention that they never could conquer the former Soviet Union, and that in many ways was their undoing, in that even though Germany had conquered a lot of territory, they couldn't hold it. So you might talk about the result of this expansionist policy might have given them some short-term gain, but it didn't last. They couldn't hold on to it, and Germany eventually lost World War II and was worse off after the war than maybe they were before the war. So maybe you're going to critique a bit the policy of expansionism because it didn't work out well for Germany in the long run, not to mention that the price of their expansionist policies would have meant that all of these other countries lose their rights and freedoms too. They lose their right to sovereignty, self-determination. They lose their nationhood. And millions of people died trying to get rid of the Nazi regime in the Third Reich. So it's really showing you the cost of expansionist policies, the cost of ultranationalism in terms of territory. You can talk a bit about human life and the money that was spent to defeat Germany in World War II. World War II, after all, cost $1.5 trillion, and 70 million people died. You could bring all of those things to the table when you attack source number one. In terms of our template, again, your theme is going to be foreign policy. Date, place, well, this would have been at the peak of the Third Reich, the Nazi regime. So probably you're looking at probably around 1942. Participants, well, you're going to talk about Germany, clearly is the main participant, but I would mention some of the other countries they had conquered. So you might mention France, you might mention Poland. I wouldn't mention all of them, but maybe three or four of them would be good enough in terms of participants. Your evidence, well, stuff that we referred to was Lebensraum, annexation of Sudetenland, invasion of Poland, anything specific that you could think of, any specific detail you would want to put under evidence. So the fact that that war cost $1.5 trillion, the fact that 70 million people died, might be numbers that you could use to refer to that source. Look at the cost of war. Look at the cost of ultranationalism. Your historical case study, again, would just be German expansionism. Connection to nationalism, well, for sure, expansionism. I might also talk about ethnocentrism. This was a term you had to define a while back now. It means that you think that your culture is superior to another. And you could really see that on the map. Germany is doing this in large part because there are feelings of ethnocentrism. We're going to dominate, we're going to conquer, because we have a better ideology, we've got a better way of life. Might be a motive for German expansionism. So you could talk about that too. You might put down ethnic cleansing. in that, as you know, as we haven't learned yet, but we're going to, this would also culminate with, of course, the Holocaust. So you could refer to ethnic cleansing. For sure, it's an example of foreign policy in action, and this would be the result of ultranationalism. In terms of perspectives, what I would go after would be the German perspective. You know, what would the Third Reich think about what they're doing? Um, but then the other perspectives you would look at, what would their opponents see them as? In other words, if you were if you were French, if you were Polish, how would you feel about the German occupation of your country? How would you feel about the Nazis marching down your street, telling you what to do, always having to be on the lookout? What would be their perspective? So I see two. I see the German perspective. What would they think about this? And I would see the perspective of those that they conquered. What do they think about the German occupation? And it's probably not going to be very good. I think that's it. I think we've done enough for that source. Stay tuned for the next one. Should be out tomorrow.